The dawn broke over the endless golden expanse of the Masai Mara, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The air shimmered with the scent of wild grass and warm, sun-baked earth, carried on a breeze that whispered secrets from centuries past. Somewhere in the distance, the deep, resonant rumble of an elephant herd rolled like distant thunder across the plains. Jimmy, a weathered photographer with skin bronzed by 1,000 African suns, stood behind his camera, every sense locked into the moment. For more than a decade, this had been his home, a simple canvas tent pitched at the fragile edge between humanity and the untamed kingdom of lions, elephants, gazelles, and creatures whose language was older than time itself. Each morning, the sky was a masterpiece in motion, painted in strokes of fire and gold, and each evening, the horizon bled into darkness with promises of stories yet untold. This particular morning was no different, or so Jimmy thought. His lens traced the sweeping, deliberate movements of a colossal elephant herd, mothers guiding calves, tusks catching the newborn sunlight like ivory flames. His pulse was steady, his mind immersed in capturing the silent poetry of life here. And then, it happened. A movement, subtle yet foreign, stirred at the edge of his vision. Not the quick dart of an antelope, not the prowling shadow of a lion. This presence was deliberate, grounded. When he turned, his breath caught in his throat. She emerged from the grass like a living statue carved from strength itself, an adult female gorilla, her dark fur rippling in the early light, her frame towering yet graceful. Jimmy's experience told him such direct approaches were rare, dangerous even. Instinctively, he gripped his camera tighter, his body bracing for the unexpected. But it wasn't her size that froze him. It was her eyes, not wild with rage, but clouded with something far more haunting, desperation. And then he saw why. Cradled in her massive yet gentle arms was a tiny, motionless infant gorilla. Its head lolled weakly to one side, its leg twisted unnaturally. Something inside Jimmy shifted. This was no predator sizing him up. This was a mother carrying the weight of the world, standing on the thin line between hope and despair. She stopped. Just meters from his tent, lowered her treasure onto the grass as if placing a fragile jewel in the hands of fate, and fixed him with a gaze that spoke louder than any human tongue. "Help me." In that instant, the walls between species crumbled. This was not man and beast. This was one soul answering the silent cry of another. Jimmy felt the words of Proverbs 12:10 burn in his heart. The righteous care for the needs of their animals, but the kindest acts of the wicked are cruel. Fear faded, replaced by a fierce, unexpected responsibility. He had spent his life capturing nature's untold stories, but this was the moment he had to live one. Jimmy's breath came slow and heavy as he knelt, the camera dangling uselessly. At his side, its strap biting into his shoulder. This was no time for photographs. This was a moment carved out of eternity, when the rhythm of the wild stopped to allow something sacred to pass through. The mother gorilla's chest rose and fell like a drumbeat, each breath deep and deliberate. Her eyes locked on him with a mix of fierce caution and naked vulnerability. The tiny infant on the ground looked impossibly fragile, its dark fur matted with dust, its small fingers curling weakly as if grasping for something unseen. A sharp ache welled in Jimmy's chest. Every instinct told him to rush forward, to scoop the little creature into his arms, but the unspoken truth of the wild held him in place. A wrong move here could shatter the delicate trust hanging between them. He felt as though the entire savannah was watching, holding its breath. Even the distant elephants seemed to have gone silent. Jimmy swallowed hard, the sound loud in his ears, and in the quiet he heard something strange, not a sound exactly, but a feeling like the echo of a prayer whispered by the earth itself. This life is not yours to take lightly. The words of Isaiah 11:6 stirred in him. The wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, and a little child will lead them. In this ancient place where predator and prey shared the same soil, he realized that compassion could be the rarest and most powerful survival instinct of all. The gorilla stepped back half a pace, her massive hands resting briefly on the grass as though anchoring herself. Jimmy saw the tremor in her fingers, the tremor of a mother who had run out of time, out of options. Something in that subtle movement tore him open. This wasn't about species. It wasn't about danger or safety. This was about a mother, willing to lay her heart in front of a stranger, risking everything for the hope of mercy. He knew he couldn't do this alone. His hands moved to his radio, fingers fumbling as he called Sarah, the park's most trusted ranger, his voice trembling with urgency. At first, her tone was all disbelief. Who could imagine a wild gorilla bringing her child to a human for help? But as Jimmy described the mother's eyes, the twisted limb, the stillness of the baby, her disbelief melted into quiet determination. This was not just another rescue. This was something unprecedented, a story the world would not believe, unless it was lived. And Jimmy was living it now, every heartbeat pounding in his ears like a countdown. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of dry grass and the faint, musky sweetness of the gorilla's fur. Jimmy could feel the moment slipping, fragile as glass, and yet holding more weight than any photograph he had ever taken. Somewhere deep inside, he knew, if they failed now, the baby wouldn't see another sunrise. And still, the mother waited, her gaze steady, her hope anchored in the strange bond that had bloomed between them in a matter of heartbeats. Sarah arrived like the slow gathering of a storm, not with chaos, but with a measured, deliberate energy that carried both caution and resolve. Her vehicle rolled to a stop at the edge of Jimmy's camp, tires crunching over the dry earth, sending up small clouds of ochre dust that swirled in the early light. Every movement from here on had to be choreographed with the precision of a heartbeat. The mother gorilla stood her ground, a dark silhouette against the shimmering gold of the grasslands, her massive shoulders squared, her breathing steady but deep. The weight of her gaze was undeniable, not threatening but evaluating. She was judging whether these humans were worthy of the trust she had extended. Sarah stepped out slowly, her khaki uniform blending into the earth, her hands empty and visible. The air between them felt charged, the kind of stillness that comes before something irreversible. Jimmy watched her every step, his own breath held tight in his chest, knowing that any sudden movement could dissolve the fragile bridge that had been built. The veterinarian followed, carrying only the essentials, a small pack, a rolled mat, and the tools of their delicate craft. They had discussed this on the radio. Minimal noise, minimal equipment, maximum respect. This wasn't just a rescue mission. It was a negotiation between worlds. As they approached, the gorilla's eyes flicked from Sarah to the vet, back to Jimmy, and then, slowly, with the solemnity of an unspoken agreement, she shifted her weight and allowed them closer. Jimmy felt something holy in that moment. In his mind, Psalm 36:6 rang clear. You preserve both people and animals. It wasn't just about saving this baby. It was about honoring the sacred thread that tied all living beings together. The vet knelt beside the tiny infant, his hands moving with a gentleness that belied the urgency of the situation. The baby's leg was worse than Jimmy had feared, the bone clearly fractured, the limb swollen and tender. Every second that passed without treatment threatened not only the leg, but the life of the baby itself. The decision was made in a breath. They would operate here, in the very tent where Jimmy had spent countless nights chasing the perfect shot of the wild. Today, the tent would be transformed into a makeshift surgical theater, a sanctuary where skill and compassion would join forces. Sarah nodded once, and they moved quickly but silently, setting up inside. Jimmy worked without thinking, clearing his own belongings, laying out the space for the procedure. He could hear the mother outside, her heavy breathing a constant reminder that the clock was ticking and that every stitch, every cut, every moment would be under her watchful eyes. As the vet prepared the sedative, Sarah's voice was soft but steady, speaking to the mother in a low murmur, as though words themselves could weave trust. The beam of a flashlight cut through the dim tent as the first touch of medicine entered the baby's small body. Outside, the mother's breath hitched, a sound so subtle Jimmy might have missed it if his entire soul hadn't been attuned to her. The moment the sedative took hold, the vet began, his hands precise and sure, the light glinting off his instruments. Jimmy stood at the edge, every muscle tense, torn between the desire to assist and the instinct to stay out of the way. Each passing minute felt like an eternity stretched thin. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic, sweat, and the faint, almost sweet aroma of the baby's fur. The world beyond the tent seemed to fade. The rustle of grass, the distant calls of the wild, even the slow drift of clouds, all of it was replaced by the rhythm of the vet's breathing and the quiet murmurs of Sarah's reassurances. And then, in the stillness between two heartbeats, Jimmy realized something profound. They were no longer rescuers and a wild mother. They were a single unit, bound by the unyielding instinct to protect the fragile flame of life flickering before them. The tent had become a world within a world, a fragile cocoon of light, breath, and quiet urgency, while the vast African plains waited just beyond the canvas walls. The operation was in full motion now, every second a delicate dance between skill and the heartbeat of hope. The veterinarian's hands moved like an artist restoring an ancient masterpiece, his tools catching the sharp glow of the flashlight as he worked to align the shattered bone. Jimmy stood at the far corner, his camera long abandoned on the ground, his eyes locked on the tiny figure on the makeshift surgical table. The baby gorilla's chest rose and fell in slow, sedated breaths, each one an unspoken prayer that this fragile spark of life would not be extinguished. Outside, the mother remained a dark, motionless silhouette against the pale morning sky, her massive frame still, but her presence thunderous. Occasionally her shadow shifted, and Jimmy could feel the weight of her gaze pressing through the fabric walls, a silent reminder of the trust they had been given, a trust that could shatter with a single mistake. Sarah knelt near the opening, one hand lightly gripping the tent pole, speaking in a low, rhythmic voice that carried both reassurance and humility. She was the bridge between worlds in this moment, a voice to soothe the instincts of a mother who was letting strangers handle her most precious treasure. The air inside the tent was heavy with concentration, but beneath it pulsed something deeper, the awareness that this was more than medicine, more than survival. It was a miracle of connection, a living testament to what could happen when compassion overrode fear. Jimmy thought of Ecclesiastes 3:19. Surely the fate of human beings is like that of the animals. The same fate awaits them both. And in that moment, the line between species disappeared entirely. The vet's fingers tightened slightly as he set the final pin into place, his face a map of focus and fatigue. The faint click of metal against bone sounded louder than the outside world, as if the whole earth had been holding its breath for that one instant. A deep, calm exhale escaped the vet's lips. The hardest part was over. Jimmy felt the tension in his body loosen just a fraction, though the weight of the moment still pressed heavy on his chest. Outside, a soft, low rumble rolled from the mother's throat. Not aggressive, but questioning, as though asking, "Is it done? Is my child safe?" The vet glanced at Sarah and gave a small nod. The final stitches were made with delicate precision. Each loop of thread not just a closure of flesh, but a promise of a second chance at life. Jimmy's vision blurred briefly, and he blinked hard to clear it, realizing only then that tears had welled in his eyes. He had witnessed storms and sunsets, hunts and births, but nothing had felt like this. This was the wild laying its heart bare, trusting human hands to mend what the earth itself could not. And in that flickering sacred space, between suffering and healing, Jimmy knew this story would not just live in his memory, it would echo in the hearts of all who heard it. The final knot was tied, the instruments laid aside, and for a long heartbeat no one moved. The only sound was the slow, measured breathing of the tiny gorilla, its chest rising in a steady rhythm that carried the promise of survival. Jimmy felt his knees weaken, a strange lightness overtaking him, the kind of weightless relief that only comes when you've been holding the air in your lungs for far too long. The veterinarian leaned back, wiping the sweat from his brow, his hands trembling slightly now that the intensity had passed. Sarah, ever composed, gave a small nod and whispered, "It's time." Those words carried more than instruction. They held the next great risk. The mother was waiting, and her trust had been earned only on loan. One wrong gesture, one moment of perceived threat, and all they had built could vanish in an instant. The tent flap opened, and the African morning poured in the smell of wild grass, the distant cries of birds, the low hum of the earth itself. Outside, the mother's shape loomed, her dark eyes sharp and searching. Jimmy's pulse thundered in his ears as the tiny gorilla was lifted with infinite care, its newly repaired leg bound and supported. Sarah stepped forward first, her movements deliberate, each one a silent declaration. We give back what was yours. The moment the mother saw her child, something passed over her face, a flicker of relief, suspicion, and a love so raw it seemed to radiate into the very air. She moved forward, slow but unstoppable, her massive hands reaching with a gentleness that defied her strength. The baby was placed within her grasp, and for a breathless instant no one knew what would happen. Would she reject the scent of human hands? Would fear or confusion override the bond? But then she cradled her child. Close, pressing her broad nose to its tiny head, inhaling deeply as if memorizing the scent anew. A deep, resonant sound, half sigh, half hum, rumbled from her chest, a sound Jimmy would remember for the rest of his life. It was gratitude, ancient and untranslatable, yet perfectly understood. In that sacred silence, Jimmy thought of Genesis 1:25, and God made the wild animals according to their kinds, and God saw that it was good. The mother turned once to look at them, at Jimmy, at Sarah, at the vet, and in her gaze was the acknowledgement of something rare and eternal. Then she shifted, holding her baby securely, and began to walk toward the tall grass. The morning sun caught the edges of her fur, turning her into a silhouette of strength and love as she disappeared into the golden sea. Jimmy stood frozen, his throat tight, his soul forever altered. This wasn't just a rescue. This was the day the wild had opened its heart to humanity, and humanity, for once, had been worthy of the gift. Weeks passed, and the memory of that morning lived in Jimmy's mind with a clarity sharper than any photograph he had ever taken. The days in the Masai Mara moved as they always had, the sun spilling gold across the plains, herds migrating like living rivers, predators stalking through the tall grass with ancient purpose. Yet for Jimmy, something had shifted. Every sunrise felt different now, carrying the echo of a moment when the wild had reached across an unbridgeable gap and placed its trust in human hands. The camp was quieter in the evenings, the usual chatter of visiting researchers replaced with long reflective silences. Sarah often stayed after her patrols, sitting with Jimmy near the edge of the grasslands where the scent of wild sage drifted through the air. They spoke little of that day, as though the weight of it could not be contained in ordinary conversation. Instead, their eyes would wander to the horizon, searching for a familiar dark shape moving among the gold. And then, one evening it happened. The light was fading, painting the sky in bruised purples and molten reds when Jimmy spotted movement. Far off in the distance, his breath caught. Through his binoculars, the shape resolved, the mother gorilla, moving with her steady, purposeful gait. But this time, the baby clung to her chest, eyes bright and alert, one tiny hand gripping her fur with new strength. Even from afar, Jimmy could see the healed leg moving with a slight limp, but carrying weight, carrying life. His chest swelled with a tide of emotions he couldn't name. He lowered the binoculars, blinking against the sudden wetness in his eyes, and in that moment whispered through his mind, "The Lord is good to all. He has compassion on all he has made." The gorilla paused, turning her face toward the camp. It was too far to know if her eyes truly met his, but Jimmy felt the connection all the same, a thread that had been woven on that morning weeks ago and would never truly break. And then she moved on, vanishing once more into the vast ocean of grass, carrying her child into the life they had fought to reclaim. Jimmy sat there long after she was gone, the first stars winking into the deepening sky. He realized this was why he had come here all those years ago. Not just to capture beauty, but to be changed by it, to be reminded that in the vast, untamed heart of the world, moments of trust and grace are the rarest treasures. And somewhere in the darkness, with the sounds of the night rising like a living choir, Jimmy knew the wild had given him something he could never repay, the knowledge that love, in all its forms, is the most powerful survival story of all. After the delicate operation, the little gorilla they had named Kio, a word that meant precious jewel in the flowing rhythm of Swahili, lay in a quiet corner of the sanctuary, swaddled not just in blankets but in the fragile hope of two human hearts. The injury to Kio's leg had been severe, a wound not just of flesh but of fate itself, and Sarah had splinted it with a precision that spoke of both skill and love. Jimmy, usually a man who saw the world through the detached frame of a camera lens, now found himself peering into something much deeper, the raw, trembling pulse of survival. Kio was weak in those first days, each breath shallow, each movement cautious, as though life itself might slip away if it moved too quickly. But Jimmy and Sarah became his unwavering sentinels. Every hour they checked on him, feeding, cleaning, whispering gentle reassurances. Jimmy would sit beside the little gorilla for hours, his voice soft as a lullaby, speaking words Kio could not understand yet somehow seemed to feel. The first time Kio's tiny hand curled around Jimmy's finger, Jimmy felt a quiet miracle unfolding. It was as if this fragile creature had reached out and tethered itself to him. The righteous care for the needs of their animals, but the kindest acts of the wicked are cruel. And in those tender days, Jimmy realized that caring for Kio was not charity, it was a sacred responsibility, an unspoken covenant between human and animal. Days passed and something extraordinary began to happen. Kio, once limp and unresponsive, started to lift his head, his eyes growing brighter, curiosity sparking like a candle in the dark. Jimmy witnessed the transformation. Day by day, the frail creature becoming playful, curious, and full of life. And yet, beyond the chain-link perimeter of the sanctuary, another story was quietly unfolding. The mother gorilla, who had been injured herself and unable to care for Kio, never truly left. Each day, without fail, she would appear at a safe distance, a silent, watchful figure among the trees. She did not approach recklessly. She did not call out. She simply stood there, her dark eyes fixed on her child with a patience that defied human understanding. Jimmy often found himself looking back at her, feeling a connection so strong it made words unnecessary. There was trust now in her gaze, the hopelessness replaced by something pure, something eternal, and he knew that she was not just watching over Kio, she was watching over them as well. In that wild silence, Jimmy felt that there are threads between species, invisible, unbreakable, woven by the Creator himself. The wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, and the little child will lead them. The mother's silent vigil reminded him that love in the wild is no less fierce, no less enduring, than the love humans feel for their own. The bond between Jimmy and Kio deepened with every passing day. Kio learned to recognize Jimmy's voice, that low, steady tone that meant safety was near. Sometimes when fear flickered in Kio's eyes, he would lean into Jimmy's chest, finding comfort in the steady rhythm of a human heartbeat. Jimmy had been a traveler, a photographer, a collector of moments. But here, in the presence of this little gorilla, he had become something else entirely, a healer, a guardian, and, in some unexplainable way, a member of a family that spanned species. And yet, as Kio's strength returned, another truth began to press on Jimmy's heart. Kio was not meant to belong to humans forever. Sarah, always thinking ahead, had been tracking the mother gorilla's movements carefully. She was still nearby. She had not abandoned hope. And so a decision was made. For Kio's sake, for his chance to grow up free, wild, and whole, they would reunite him with his mother before human attachment replaced the instincts of the forest. The day they chose for the reunion was chosen with care, a quiet dawn. The forest draped in mist, the world hushed as though it knew something sacred was about to happen. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. It was Kio's time to return home. They carried Kio to a clearing known to his mother, a place where the earth smelled rich and the air was alive with the sound of rustling leaves. Jimmy set him gently on the ground, his small feet sinking into the moss. Kio looked around, his head tilting as he listened to the forest he had almost forgotten. Then, from behind a cluster of trees, she appeared. Not far away, not hesitant this time, but close enough that Jimmy could see the shine in her eyes. The mother gorilla stepped forward slowly, each movement deliberate. Her gaze locked on Keo, and then it happened. Keo saw her, recognition. Pure and undeniable, lit up his face. For a moment, time stopped. The sounds of the forest faded, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. And then, with a soft, almost human sound, the mother reached out, closing the space between them. She bent down, gathering Keo into her arms, and he nestled into her fur with a sigh so full of relief that Jimmy's vision blurred with tears. Sarah's hand found his, and together they stood back, watching a reunion that needed no human words. As a mother comforts her child, so will I comfort you. And in that embrace, they saw not just love, they saw the miracle of trust. Fulfilled. Jimmy and Sarah walked away that day, leaving Keo and his mother to disappear into the green depths of their world. But they carried with them something more than memories. They had witnessed a truth that no camera could fully capture. That compassion can bridge the gap between human and wild, that patience can mend what fear has broken. For Jimmy, the man who once thought his greatest work was found in photographs, this had been the story of his life, not because it was beautiful, but because it had changed him. He had learned that animals are not mere creatures to be observed, but souls to be respected, each carrying their own wisdom and depth. Sarah, whose days were spent in the quiet war for conservation, knew that moments like these were why she fought, because every reunion, every survival story, was proof that hope still lived in the wild. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. And that mercy, given freely, had saved a life. If this story of Jimmy, Sarah, Keo, and the silent guardian in the forest moved you, then know this: the wild is full of such moments. Most unseen, unheard, and untold, but each one matters. Each one is a reminder that every act of kindness, whether between humans or between species, sends ripples through the world, changing it in ways we cannot always measure. This is more than an animal rescue. It is a reminder that in the vast tapestry of life, every thread is connected. And if you listen closely, you will hear it, the quiet call to protect, to care, to stand for those who cannot speak for themselves. The earth is the Lord's, and everything in it, the world, and all who live in it. We are all part of this world, bound by the same breath, the same beating heart of creation. And sometimes, the smallest story, a baby gorilla taking its first steps back into the wild, can be the loudest reminder that we are, and always will be, one family. In the quiet after the reunion, the forest seemed to exhale, a slow, tender breath that carried away the weight of weeks filled with fear, pain, and longing. Keo was gone now, cradled in the arms of the one who had given him life. But the imprint he left behind in Jimmy and Sarah's hearts was permanent. They hadn't just rescued a gorilla. They had touched the eternal rhythm of creation, the sacred design that binds every living thing together. Standing there, listening to the distant rustle of leaves as mother and child disappeared into the green, Jimmy understood something he never had before. Real rescue isn't just about saving a life. It's about returning it to where it belongs, whole and unbroken. And in that moment, he realized that this was the greatest photograph he would never take. It lived not on film, but in the soul. The world might never know their names, and the forest would forget their footsteps, but heaven itself had witnessed the miracle. It was proof that in the hardest, most unforgiving corners of the earth, kindness still grows, and it is strong enough to bring the lost home. The Lord is good to all. He has compassion on all he has made, and in that truth, Jimmy and Sarah found peace. They turned and walked away, not with sadness, but with a quiet joy that would burn in their hearts for the rest of their days. For in saving Keo, they had been saved too, rescued from the distance we often keep between ourselves and the wild beauty of God's creation.